Hey everyone, before we jump into today's conversation, we want to ask for your help. Here's the deal. Producing Faithful Politics isn't easy. We're entirely self-funded, meaning we don't collect a paycheck for the work we do. That means we rely on people like you, our listeners, and our audience to keep this podcast going. So if you believe in what we're doing, we're asking you to consider supporting us.
And here's why it matters. Let's face it, most of the media today runs on conflict and drama. You've heard me say this before. If you can control people's fears, you can control them. The louder and more polarizing you are, the more attention you get. But we here at Faithful Politics are committed to something different. Conversations that are thoughtful, nuanced, and respectful. Unfortunately, those kind of conversations don't get rewarded in today's media landscape.
So if you value substance over spectacle and civility over chaos, we'd love to get your support. There's a link in the show notes where you can easily give $5, $10, or even $1,000. Big or small, it all helps. You can even do it while you're listening to this episode. Together, we can show that meaningful dialogue still has a place in our culture. Thank you so much for considering, and hope you enjoy the show.
And it's always about, well, the other side does it, right? Or there's this normalizing of the behavior from the other side, or all politicians do this, all politicians lie, right? That's a common kind of phrase you'd get. And you would see that as a real quick pushback, right? Or people would be they'd have like that, they would already have a justification for it very quickly. There would be a few of those that would be a little quieter, more reserved just in general. But the times in which you did see like the cognitive dissonance dim and like the critical thinking really turn on was you'd start kind of like seeing people like sit back and you see the arms cross, or you'd see like this kind of gradual like sulking and like not anger, but like an uncomfortability thing when you'd bring facts up.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching our YouTube channel, I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, pastor, clergy, Josh Burtram. How's it going?
Doing well. Thanks, Will.
And with us today, we have with us Travis Ruddle. He is a assistant professor at Brigham Young University's Romney Institute of Public Service and Ethics. Dr. Ruddle's research focuses on issues within the public, nonprofit, and for-profit sectors, including citizens' experiences, crisis and scandals, and ethical and moral behavior in organizations. And I couldn't think of anybody I want to talk more to about Trump's mindset and the mindset of his followers, actually, than Dr. Ruddle. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So you have a new book out called The Totality of Allegiance, Inside the Hearts and Minds of Trump Supporters. This book was published before the election, but I'd love for you just tell us a little bit about it and why did you decide to write it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the crucial aspects, if you went to a bookstore and you were trying to understand what is happening, so much is focused purely on Trump, the man, right? Or Trump, the politician, or Trump, the businessman. Very rarely you get something focused purely on his supporters and those voters or potential voters. And we felt it was really important, my co-author, Brad Agel, and I. And so what we're trying to do is have a jump in through these focus groups and really try to understand the reasonings, the why, the how people get to that determination of supporting Donald Trump, or how they got to the determination of supporting him in 2016 or in 2020, as well as, of course, just recently and here in 2024. And what we're doing is a very humane approach, meaning we are really open. We have a deep, deep curiosity of understanding that why. And so it doesn't go into it with pure judgment. It doesn't go in preconceived notions of this are purely like just cult followers, or this is purely those people who are just idiots, morons. Those are people who are not like thinking rationally. There are clear cognitive things going on, good, bad, and ugly. There are clear like theories that can describe this. But what we do is go in open-minded and then bridge a lot of the theories from sociology, psychology, political science, and try and kind of fit the puzzle pieces together to explain some of it with also a clear underpinning. What we want to say is We're not Nostradamus. We couldn't predict the election by any means. In fact, I was completely up in the air of how it would go, because there is these same kind of theories happen on the other side of the aisle too. This is not just a thing that happens only on one side. So a lot of what I'll talk about today it is found in Trump supporters, but there are similarities that are there. Maybe there's some severity or some uniqueness with Trump followers, but it's not a party issue. It's a human issue.
That's really well said. And I appreciate you kind of clarifying that. I would love for you to jump into and describe for us what is the totality of allegiance. Help us understand that concept and how it manifests among Trump supporters. Where do we see this? What does it look like when we're looking at a Trump supporter?
One of the things you'd see pretty clearly is, take, for instance, someone's own personal identity or something that they have very dear to them. And then they would become allegiant to something that's somewhat separated in a way from those norms or some of those customs they once had. And so there's this breach, this gradual, unwitting or witting, usually much more the unwitting kind of erosion of that identity towards the group identity. You begin to kind of gradually look at facts differently. You have less critical thinking. And this is not meaning, again, this is not just Trump supporters by any means. But what you're kind of gradually doing is you're not seeing the full lay of the land. You're essentially going in purely allegiant, and that totality takes care of a lot of facts for you. It doesn't make it like the facts are purely themselves. John Adams says it beautifully, as facts are very stubborn things. And I think what basically is a highlight that we see in the focus groups, that we see others, is this just gradual erosion of those facts, and that critical thinking just isn't as strong. It does not mean that someone doesn't have like their own reasons for supporting Trump, and that's against all sorts of rational behavior, and there's sort of issues. What it is showing is, for any support of any politician, any support of any elected official, and you're doing it based in pure allegiance, that allegiance can be total erosion of your deep principles, some of your deep norms, some of your religious tenets, a number of things. And it blacks out a lot of things that are once really, really dear and different for you.
Interesting. Before we discuss or unpack some of the findings, I think our audience would really love to just hear some of the background, maybe process information, demographics, sample size, all that other kind of stuff.
So absolutely. So one of the things we had decided, my co-author and I, is to how do you get to this determination of really trying to understand Trump supporters and really listening about their concerns about the economy, concerns about inflation, what have you. So that's the one fold. You could do that in just surveys if you wanted, right? You could just do that through a Qualtrics survey and just kind of do some Likert scale types of things, like strongly agree to disagree. But it's not as deep. It's not as strong. So what is better is like a focus group. So we did focus groups across the country. Primarily what we'd say is Utah, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Arizona were like the four crucial bits that we used in the book. And we had to basically do what we call snowball sampling, where we'd hear from someone who's like, yeah, we'd be willing to talk to you all for an hour and a half and get paid $30, this Amazon gift card that we do to kind of compensate for that time. And so they'd say, okay, I'll bring my friend along and I'll bring this person I know, or we'd blank it out through various posts.
Travis, just real fast.
Yeah.
I have to ask because I've seen those emails and I don't know, I've just been conditioned or trained to not click on anything that if somebody's offering a $30 Amazon gift card.
That's right. So you'd find actually the ones that didn't work as well. I mean, we probably grabbed, a handful that were just based on that. It was, you had to personally know someone and get close to them and actually have a conversation with them So that trust was sort of like built in. Otherwise, there's just like this feeling it's a trap, right? And so you're right. Like that is that is absolutely right. That connection was so important in what you're doing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that makes so much.
No, I love that. I think that's a really important part. I mean, that's a significant part of the whole conversation for the 1.5 hours is for someone to spend their time with us to really talk about the deep stuff, like their own feelings, and really open up. I mean, some people were a little more reserved, but generally they were like no holds barred. It was just let go, and that's what I want. I want that truth. So having our participants, about 55 participants. Across the country, pretty in terms of demographics, is it much more Caucasian basis, especially with that sampling. But it was very much a little bit more male, but just only by a couple participants. And then evangelical, Latter-day Saint, a couple non-adherents for that matter. Incomes varied, so it was what you would call the most typical kind of population of Trump voters, even though his has expanded quite a bit this last go around. But yeah, that was generally what that looked like.
So in the research, there's this comparison between Trump supporters and some other historical maybe examples of authoritarian followers or people that, are attracted to that kind of thing. And I totally get like, it wasn't like you're trying to say, hey, if you're a Trump supporter, if you voted for Trump, then you love authoritarian figures, or you're completely, okay with anything that he says or does, or, you're okay with democracy falling apart. The kinds of things that you hear people say, this kinds of exaggerations at times, right? And of course, what Trump is going to do is yet to be seen. Everyone's trying to figure that out. Everyone's trying to work through this, right, and understand it. And you can look at things he's done and make predictions about what he might do, and yet painting everyone with a broad brush would probably not be the wisest thing to do. And yet we do have these, it seems like, clear examples of this kind of people that are attracted to a more authoritarian bent. What are these parallels, and kind of talk to us about their implications? Why is it important to recognize this?
Yeah, no, that's a really important question. It's a really thing we wanted to distinguish, that these are not Nazis, that Trump supporters do not equate equally to that by any means. Or is it something as in they as Trump supporters are not authoritarian lovers, or they don't desire like pure tyrannical totalitarian type things? There are elements, there are pieces of that we could say, like a couple of focus group quotes. You would say, I like that he's a bully, right? Okay, well, you could connect bully with strongman, clearly, okay? But there's also a tendency that what that also is saying is you want someone who's strong. You want like the MAGA tenets. You want elements there instead of looking weak. Now, you could go deeper into this with a couple other quotes, and it talks about like great distrust in institutions, great distrust in juries and their fellow peers, lots of things that we kind of saw in these discussions. And that is a ripening element and piece in authoritarian and totalitarian when there's just such a deep lack of trust. And so there's like this savior or the authoritarian complex that does appear. So there are similarities. It is not a one-for-one equivalence by any means, but there are environmental and cultural connections there where people gradually find, in a weird way, like politicians have got one of the lowest trust of any of the part of our institutions and some of our agencies. We see that historically. We see that, but then they find that one politician, or if, in Trump's case, we consider him to be like the outsider, even though he's been there kind of weirdly like a non-incumbent, but sort of is. And there's just seems to be some sort of trust there that people are able to connect with. There's this commentary, this rhetoric that may not always jive with people, but it actually, at its core, if you go deep into the conversations of what people are, or what he's saying, they connect with. And I'm from very, very conservative part of Oklahoma, rural northeast part of Oklahoma. And those conversations that Trump might say that may be a little off-putting and off the norms from the regular mass media or on CNN, MSNBC, even parts of Fox News, is actually those are conversations of things people actually say. So it's not necessarily far off the beaten path.
I want to kind of dig into some of the results, but I'd love to maybe make it very specific, because you mentioned that sort of the demographics of folks that you spoke with are, Latter-day Saints, Christians, and the nuns or whatever. So what issue or what answer to a question that you have did you see the greatest disparity between like those three groups?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
All right, we'll get back into the conversation in just a moment, but we wanted to take a break and share something really special. One of the best parts about this podcast is hearing from you, our listeners. Your comments, feedback, and support remind us why we do this.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of listener comments here that we wanted to highlight. For example, a listener from Greenville, South Carolina wrote, "Thank you so much for your shows. They help me feel seen. Truly, your friendship and humility is encouraging." And then a listener from Ohio said, "Josh and Will do an incredible job touching the challenging issues of religion and politics. You can agree to disagree and still love. Josh and Will are testimony to this, as they are on opposite sides of the political divide, but are the best of friends. You won't be disappointed."
I'm pretty sure my mom wrote that one, by the way. There's also this comment from Nick. "Of numerous podcasts I have listened to that purport to give an objective view of politics and religion, this one comes the closest. A staunch Trump supporter might disagree with me, as this podcast is not a home to the ex-president's sycophants. Yet, right-leaning co-host Pastor Josh faithfully articulates concerns from the right side of the aisle, and by the host's accounting, their listeners come from across the political spectrum. Left-leaning co-host Will Wright, for his part, has read and digested the fine print of the political documents he brings up, an important service to listeners." Seriously, it's comments like these that keep us going. And if you've been enjoying the show and want to help us continue, here's how you can support us. In the notes, there's a link that will allow you to leave a donation and a note. Whether it's big or small, every bit helps, and every bit keeps us going in the work that we're doing.
And who knows, if you leave us a comment or message, we might just read it on the air on a future episode. So yeah, give us a donation, give us some comments, let us know what you think about it. And the biggest thing is just thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now, back to the show.
When I was in Oklahoma, particularly, which is what we very evangelical, I noticed some really unique comments about Trump's own characteristics or his identity. Saw some really unique perspectives about how he's seen as a baby Christian. And so you hear that and you're kind of going, what? Can you tell me more about that? Because I don't even know what that term really means. And so, of course, it's someone new to Christianity in the way that they identified, which connects with a lot of, being born again kind of a thing. So there was a lot of excusing past behaviors, knowing that they're new to it, so they're getting better about it, or some of the other parts of his own where he's from in New York. There's just a lot. There was some rationalization, or like this moral rationalization, this moral disengagement, essentially. There was also just this. There was some strong issues against Biden, for instance, and his religion being Catholic. That was promoted. Actually, not me even saying it specifically. It just came out, and I thought that was just kind of fascinating and different. If I looked at Utah and Arizona, as where more of the Latter-day Saints were, there was a little bit of a stronger pushback on the moral tendency, like really saying, no, he's a really bad dude, or he just I'm sick of it. I'm very sick of it. But there'd always be that but. The economy is number one or something of that nature. So there were differences, but by and large, the economy or those issues were like prime importance, and the other parts just did not matter as strongly for others. Didn't mean that they didn't discount it, but it was just, the economy and immigration was the drivers in the conversation.
Wow, that's super interesting. To see how people are, like, what's most important to them. We had Sam Perry on our show, and he kind of did an analysis at the time of what the data was available for how, what was driving votes. And it was like people were forgetting this sense that, yeah, even though the economy has done well, prices are 4 times as high or something like that, or 3 times as high. There's clear inflation. People don't like open borders, the idea of it, and or the way that they presented it, right? And so those were these massive drivers where kind of the Democratic Party thought maybe more LGBTQ and trans rights, that more of the abortion issues would touch more people's hearts and minds, and that they would vote a certain way. And yet, we didn't see that necessarily, although there were indications, right, and different ballot initiatives where they were either pro-abortion or were pro-LGBTQ. And so it's not as clear-cut as, oh, yeah, Trump, people that voted for Trump, they think this way. People who didn't,
right,
they think this way, right? There, you have to allow for that nuance. You have to allow for the difference in people's motivations. But one of the things that's interesting to me about your research is the sense of cognitive dissonance that you might have found in certain participants. And especially thinking about this idea of Trump's character, like we were kind of talking about that in your previous question, his character, the way that he talks about people, the way he treats people, his moral failings. I mean, he is a convicted felon, and there's a lot of things, going on. And how did that come up, and how did people work through that cognitive dissonance in the conversations that you were a part of?
Well, we often see that in there's this term called a whataboutism, and it's always about, well, the other side does it, right? Or there's this normalizing of the behavior from the other side, or all politicians do this, all politicians lie, right? That's a common kind of phrase you'd get, and you would see that as a real quick pushback, right? Or people would be they'd have like that, they would already have a justification for it very quickly. It wouldn't be, there would be a few of those that would be a little quieter, more reserved just in general. But the times in which you did see like the cognitive dissonance dim and like the critical thinking really turn on was you'd start kind of like seeing people like sit back, and you'd see the arms cross, or you'd see like this kind of gradual like sulking, and like not anger, but like an uncomfortability thing when you'd bring facts up. Because what we'd do is we'd throw some facts at people, triangulated from multiple sources about various issues. And we'd ask about, what do you think of those facts? Do you think they're real, or do you think that, they're not valid?
Could you give an example of one of the facts? And
yes.
Sorry, I think that would be super helpful to hear that.
So we'd say, for instance, what we did is he played a video about the stolen election, right? Of the supposed stolen election. And it would basically have all these things broken up by certain things that were found. Facts about that MSNBC, NBC, the Associated Press, Fox News, various sources would say these facts about the election were this, this, and this. We used this lost, not stolen report, which is by a number of Republicans who basically had said that, Ben Ginsburg, as well as Tom Griffith. And we showed that with them. And within that list, we would mark individually what they would do after they saw the video, got the facts. They marked individually how valid was that on like a scale of 1 to 5, or they would basically look at how much did they believe or already know about that information. And that one, we didn't see the kind of uncomfortability as much. There's just almost a little bit more of the recognition that, yes, it was about half and half about our participants who said like the election was stolen in some semblance, or at least that the information they had was valid or not valid. But the moral part, the next set of questions that we had about his character, the number of felonies, his, inappropriate behaviors, those facts brought and triangulated from our graduate student team, as well as each of those news agencies based on a number of ideological perspectives in the center. So it wasn't just one-off news story. That's the one that got people to get a little bit more uncomfortable. Sometimes you get the quick, again, utterance, even before when we're just doing an individual like survey, then we talk to the whole group afterwards. Some would just make a comment and we'd be like, hold on, just let everybody else get to that. Then we'll get to the whole group conversation. So some would just get a little pushback early, and then others are just, you can tell it's hitting them. It's hitting them pretty hard.
Yeah, I meant to ask you this earlier, and if you said it and I missed it, I apologize. But how did you know you're getting Trump supporters or voters, and or is there a difference kind of with your focus group between I guess like at the time you conducted the focus group, the election hadn't happened yet, so I suppose it would just be Trump supporters.
Yes, they would basically in our consent, when we were asking for people to say your interest if you are planning to or supporting, Donald Trump for the primaries. At that point, it was primary time and the caucus time, but that wrapped up very quickly. So a lot of times conversations immediately went into the general election. And again, that was Joe Biden at that time, not Kamala, which has been amazing to see the differences between Vice President Harris, President Biden, and then now President-elect Trump. But I mean, that'd been a whole different story and a whole different ballgame. But who in the world would have known that would have gone on? But that essentially, they would self-identify. And in everyone, generally, you could see that as they marked at the end. We'd said, like, to what extent percentage will they do it? It was always 75 to 90% or 100% chance they would vote for him.
Well, what was the biggest surprise you think from talking to all the different groups and whatnot?
One of the things we really wanted to do was try to understand the why of Donald Trump, but also the why of not supporting other Republicans at that time. Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, amongst others. That was one of the very first reasons, is like, you guys have an off-ramp from the moral issues, by and large, right? You could, if you really took that adherence of all politicians lie, no matter what, right? You could do that if you want. But you did have off-ramps. You did have good economic policies, maybe with DeSantis, or you did have some things that were really connect. And we oftentimes would get this excuse of there's just nobody else better. There's just the others. All that these candidates have is because of Trump. We got this from a couple of BYU students, actually, there on campus there in Utah, that were talking about all that every one of these candidates, they would not be successful without Trump. So we saw very much often there's just that off-ramp was closed. Even though they wanted the off-ramp, like they literally would say, I wish there was someone better. And you'd be going, but there are other options. But maybe those to them they aren't better. That's fine. Like that's an okay determination. But you're trying to get to that point of how is it not better than this or something? And I just people could really struggle to distinguish. It was just really difficult. And that was one that amongst many surprises, but that I think initially was really interesting. If I had to say the other surprise, and this is the part where I recognize a lot of where I've brought up in rural Oklahoma, is no matter what, these people are really good, decent human beings. And these are grandmas who, teach Sunday school better than any clergy person. These are grandfathers who have a work ethic stronger than anybody else you'll ever meet. Or these are people who are just really, you trust with your kids, your dogs, your cats, everything, right? Like they're awesome people that you don't see like the insurrectionist on the street, right? As much. They're more of the rarity. And I think the real surprise in some way wasn't that I went into it knowing that they weren't. But when you got in the room or you got into one of those focus groups, especially in one in southern Utah, it was a very spiritual experience, is what I'd say. It was a really emotional experience to talk to these people who are just the salt of the earth. And I think that not necessarily the surprise, but the most important finding is that humanity.
Yeah, is there a Jack in a Box in the background about to?
Yeah, it's a cuckoo clock. Yeah, sorry about that. I knew there'd be something wrong technologically at all this, so there it is.
That's why it is Christmas season, and I was thinking about that scene in Elf when he had to like wind up the like Jack in a Boxes, and then it like pops out and he gets really scared, and
when you least expect it. Yeah. Yeah, it's also off about a minute or two. So
yeah, I am kind of like curious about the well, actually, before I ask the question, I want to agree with you that yes, like Trump supporters, MAGA people, they're humans. We should respect them, love them. I mean, I'm a part of this chat group with a bunch of my military friends, and with the exception of maybe like two, they're all pretty diehard Trump supporters. But they're some of my closest friends. Like I love them to death. So I appreciate you at least still respecting and acknowledging the humanity that everybody has, regardless of who it is.
Because it's a few circles on a ballot that distinguish us in a lot of ways. And and some other things, whether you're maybe a gun holder or gun, there are a few little things. But deep down on that day in voting, or you're mailing by ballot by a month or whatever, like you're circling a few boxes or circles different. And that's the big difference. And that's really not a big difference.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But my question was more focused on like, within voting, they have like, low propensity, high propensity voters. Basically, like if you voted in all the elections in the past, whatever, 4 years to include state, local, like you're probably, for the lack of a better term, you're pretty woke. Like you understand kind of what's going on, like within your community, the country. And then you have like I've got a friend who could barely tell you who the president is in any given year, not because he's like unintelligent. It's just he's got better things to do, but he'll go to the ballot, if enough people pressure him and vote for whatever party, he's been raised to believe. And I'd imagine that voter may have different understanding of who Trump is as a person because they're not, watching cable news 24 hours a day. So like, did your focus group kind of take that into consideration? And did you get the kind of it, result from the high propensity voters that you would expect, and then the same kind with the low propensity?
Okay, so on that, let's see. So in the kind of the surveys we do at the end, a few questions that we have are about, how much social media usage do they get for their news on political events or on politics. Also about which Instagram, or if it's LinkedIn, or all those kind of different other things, including X or Facebook. We ask about specific news media, such Fox News, Newsmax, MSNBC, PBS, etc. Then we also have a few kind of questions about some of the issues. But by and large, if we look at like in the conversations we had with people, there'd be something on one end where you could see the connection with the low propensity, which we'd triangulate with the actual focus group participant and then their survey, such as I never watched the news, but I started watching it when Trump came in because then it became fun. And you're like, okay, so that's different. A lot of people do not think the news is fun or that anything about that is any fun. generally people are like really, really turned off by it. But that was something different for low propensity voters. The high propensity people were the ones who watched Fox or Newsmax or OAN, and we saw an enormous shift in watchage usage of like Newsmax or some of the other more conservative outlets. Fox News is, for lack of better words, dead to a lot of people in comparison. So there's a unique shift where they don't feel as comfortable with Fox News. So there's this kind of not woke, not anti-woke, but there's this kind of convergence of what Trump is saying, that Fox News isn't trustful as much. And then so the people have gradually shifted. And I think that happened especially after the 2020 election, particularly on that growth. That was something I think was unique and a shift that we wouldn't have seen 4 years ago.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what so many things of what you just said are making me think about like so many stereotypes and ideas that people have about what motivates someone to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And in this particular case, what motivates someone's distrust or trust in media? Because I will hear a lot. One, I've heard a lot that you need to be careful the media you're consuming, right? You need to become better, media consumers in the sense that you're checking it. You're not just assuming it's correct. You're getting ideas from other sides, this kind of competency that you're supposed to have. And that is, I've heard of many conversations on this podcast about how illiterate in some ways people are with media and their media literacy, meaning their competence in judging the accuracy or truthfulness or whatever it is behind this media is so important, because there's so much out there that could be fake news or disinformation, misinformation, all those kinds of things. But it's interesting because it's like what you're saying is that there's certain media that's distrusted and other media that is very much trusted. Mm-hmm. So it's not this distrust for media, but for a certain kind of media, for certain major media syndicates or outlets or things like that. And I would love for you to kind of dig into this idea, this phenomenon of people distrusting media, and what kinds of media do they distrust? I mean, you kind of alluded to and talked to about it, right? But even help us understand more, like, what is this widespread distrust? Because I've experienced that personally in many conversations with friends, a deep distrust. So for instance, like I could not, for me to bring something to them from the New York Times or from CNN would right off the bat be dismissed.
Yep.
Which I acknowledge is not a good practice. And yet that's coming from somewhere. It's like, it's not, I don't know. Are they consuming media at the same level as everyone else, and it's just a different kind? Or is there really like this sense, like there's such distrust of media that, they're not even they're only gonna read Trump's tweets and that's how they get their news, kind of thing?
Right. So this is a phenomenal, grouping of questions to get at. And I think it connects also to the past when people have great distrust in institutions, starting with agencies from IRS to CDC to whatever, and according with elected officials and news, is just in general, distrust is very low, or distrust is very high, for a number of our institutions. And this has been going on before Trump. We're talking basically since, Kennedy assassination to Nixon, Vietnam War, all of these things going on. Like, this has been on that train for a while. And what we'd see actually in the past, a lot of discussion about like yellow journalism, furnishing the pictures and furnishing the war. And that's been a part of it. I think this corporatized media, even I hear from a lot of people, I've got great concerns about like corporate media, even more conservative circles that are more pro-corporate. There's great concerns about this issue and the money in it, coming post-fairness doctrine and things of that nature. One of the things I think was really crucial that we recognized were those people who could check a lot of the boxes. They were willing to check CBS, Fox, Newsmax, and others. And I was like, well, those are people that are willing to dip their toes in a little bit and get various views. And we did see that. We got to see some that were doing it. But what I did realize when I asked a few people what that meant, when they're checking CBS or NBC, they're usually looking at it in terms of local news, right? Not necessarily the evening news or how do I put this? Like, I guess we'd say like the evening news was not what they're connecting. It was the local news. And then they'd say, for instance, they'd watch Fox News at night. And so you're like, okay, I see what you're doing. You're looking at the local level or you're looking at the state level, versus those who were like checking all the boxes because they take in all the media. They take in all the information that they can to try and get to that determination. And I thought what was really important was the conversations they had, like a more holistic, fuller perspective, were those who were like really trying to consume all types of information. The ones who checked InfoWars or Newsmax and a few others, or maybe Joe Rogan, for instance. And I think there's actually some real fruit that actually comes from that podcast, for instance, and others. They were a little bit quick on their judgments and a little more hard grain, more like deep into those beliefs or that connection. Or they may just get, whatever Trump's saying on Truth Social or what have you. But there was something, those people who are willing to triangulate, willing to look across the aisle or across different sources, I saw like the critical thinking light come on at times, or the more willingness to call out things what they were. And I'll give you an instance right now, what's going on with, for instance, President Biden and pardoning of his son. If we see people on the Democratic side willing to go on CNN, we see it all across the media sources, left and right, who are pretty much hitting Biden for lying, essentially, right? And if people are willing to like spout that off, retweet it, post it, talk about it, that's a good sign like there's some good critical thinking going on that that's not right. And if you see it on the other side in any instance like that, and it's just not being talked about or some sort of an issue, not just that issue, but another one, it's just kind of mind blowing where you can tell where the media sourcing is finding its tribal pattern. And then people then subscribe into that tribalism that just fits their thinking and fits that what we call kind of the, my goodness, completely going blank on what it is, but essentially the biases, right? Motivated reasoning. They're already reasoned and they're motivated on whatever their previous preconceived feelings, notions are.
Yeah. So I have to ask, did the Trump campaign coordinate any of this with you all? Because it seems like the research you're doing would have been just gold to like somebody in the Trump campaign.
No, they did not. They did not by any means. No, but I think it hopefully, yeah, I appreciate the compliment of its gold. Yeah.
I mean, if I were, Susie Wiles or Chris LaSavita, yeah, like I would have been blowing your phone up and be like, you just did what now? And how many states? Yeah. Can you do the same thing in like Arizona, Pennsylvania, like Georgia? Because I mean, he won anyway. So I guess it's sort of a moot point, but still like you focus grouped a ton of people that, you have a decent idea of how they think about things, or at least the group or Trump supporters think about things as a whole. But I am curious though, like the Latter-day Saints part. Like were there differences with like Latter-day Saints and Christians and how they responded to stuff, and I don't know all the details of the questions you asked them, but stuff like religious freedom, abortion, LGBTQ, stuff like that.
Yeah. So I talked about some of the pieces that we found earlier, but you would see that in some of the quotes. There are various things. As a Latter-day Saint myself, and prior was a Methodist in rural parts of Oklahoma, but one of the things you'd see are like some of the scriptures from either the Book of Mormon or others that would be out there. Ideas of like secret combinations, which kind of has this hidden dark issue. You've also got like some of the things in connections with certain figures in scripture that they'd see as, I guess, would symbolize what's going on currently in society. So you'd see this lingering discussion going on. You'd see the same in evangelical parts. You'd see the conversations about how you just see like how the schools are getting taken over. And there was a little conversation about, separating God from schools and that getting in. There's a lot of conversations about that going on right now. I would say if there was another clear difference that we might see, whether it's in Utah, Arizona versus some others, is Latter-day Saints. I indicated this is about they were willing to really call out the moral failings a little quicker, or much quicker. We'll put it that way. But at the same time, there'd be a quick justification for it. So on one hand, quick calling it out, a very, very agile calling it out, but then a quick justification of that. So that was something that was clearly going on. So I'd say just in conversations we'd have with Latter-day Saints, you'd see some mingling of scripture and their own Latter-day Saint scripture they get in to identify what's going on. Evangelical community, you'd see something similar, but you wouldn't, of course, get the same Book of Mormon jargon, for instance.
So there's this question that's like just scratching at the back of my mind, mm-hmm. and it kind of is connecting to all these different things and these concepts that we've talked about, because we've covered some amazing ground. It's really awesome to hear from someone with such empathy, wanting to understand, the mindset of people that are really strong Trump supporters. I think that's really important to understand that and understand it in a non-judgmental way, in a non-hostile way. And just as equally as it is to understand someone who is in the LGBTQ community, just as much as it's important to understand someone who's part of Antifa or something like that, if that is even such a thing. So, what we have to understand where people are. And one of my questions, though, is it keeps hitting me, is this idea of what does this mean for democracy? Right. I've been very concerned. Will and I have had many conversations about our concern. This isn't about democracy, the state of democracy, not only in America, right, but this is from everything I've been looking at and trying to research, very minimal. But this is a worldwide global thing. There are figures that are rising in the ranks or already have been there that are authoritarian. By almost all of the academic measures of what that would mean. And it seems, and they almost put forward this fake democracy, this faux democracy, like Putin in elections, like they have elections in Russia, and yet Putin always wins, right, by a landslide or whatever it is. And so it's like we have this, I guess the question I'm really getting at is where are the tensions and the places, like the tensions and the places where there's some kind of peace or harmony with people that have this kind of total allegiance? how does that work in a democratic society? Does it work? And if you don't, answer to the degree that you feel comfortable within your expertise and your work. But how does this bode for our democracy with the kind of allegiance that you were finding in your research?
No, absolutely. Well, and I think the first bit would be, if we're to be really empathetic, we recognize there is allegiance to some degree, maybe not the same severity, maybe not the same way we'd think about it at an authoritarian level, but there is a totality of allegiance for more liberal candidates, or more would be more democratic. Like, no matter what, they're voting D. Like, it doesn't matter. And the same goes. And I think you go in with that and recognize, okay, this is a human problem. To go into a totality of allegiance, then you're on the first right track. Like, just a little bit of an introspective view is, oh, how do I do when I'm marking things up? Did I really do that research? Did I do that due diligence? That's the first step. The second other piece is recognition historically is how the decline of social capital, the decline of distrusted institutions is going on. So Robert Putnam, like in his book Bowling Alone, talks about how we don't bowl together anymore. We don't do a lot of fellowshipping together to the same degree. And of course, there's a lot of demographic variables. There's working two-parent households. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on there. So it's not always black and white on that. But what that's saying to me is our distrust in institutions have gone up. The decline in social capital is going on. That's telling us we need to get closer to one another and listen to each other. And remember, the checking of the boxes, filling in the bubbles on a ballot is one aspect that's of difference. But we go to the same church, we attend the same PTA meetings, kids go to the same schools, and we still show up every day. Our kids show up every day. That it's like there are a lot of differences, but boy, there's so many more similarities. So we start with that also, and then. I talk with my students. A couple of them are kind of struggling with what to do, after the election, or just like feeling defeated, not just at the election itself, but it's like, what do I do now? Or what can I do? And I go, well, let's start off with all politics are local. You voted on the local level. You voted at the state level. You voted for city council or ballot measures. And it's like, on the macro level, CNN and MSNBC or Fox News, they talk a lot about stuff up here. But what they don't talk about is not only international as much, especially as they used to, and then the state and local level, there is so much that can get done at those levels and have conversations, meaningful conversations, voting, doing things through nonprofits and volunteering, a lot of altruistic things to do that actually bridge those divides rather than this stupid, presidential level all the time. And there's a lot more closer that we have issues with at a local level. Like, I'm more concerned about what's going on at Utah Lake over here, or with this road, next to me. And then people can bridge together. It's like, I voted for Trump and I voted for Vice President Harris, but you know what? We care about that right now. And that actually is like we're kind of building the institution of the neighborhood and our kind of our unit, the most important unit, our neighbors, our fellow citizens, is just going to be a lot more rewarding than thinking of them as the Trump supporter who I'm going to city council with or going to PTA meeting with. And I think Trump supporters, by and large, want to not be viewed as a Trump supporter. They want to be viewed as an American, as a father, as a mother. And so I think we put ourselves in a tribal trap and try and put ourselves into like these quick heuristics of labeling people. I guarantee you people who voted for Trump, yes, some are very stalwart, clearly are not afraid to, have the MAGA flag, not afraid to like really spout it. But by and large, I'm finding these are people who just are true, good, decent human beings. The same goes for the other side, good, decent human beings who just need to realize the things going on at the top are very little compared to the things deeper. Now, there are real issues about institutions. I think and contacting your officials. When I was in D.C. For a conference a couple weeks ago, I went and talked with, a few people about certain issues. And it's just like, I know the average person doesn't do this very much, but you know what? I'm trying to tell people, no, go do that. That is how you get your voice heard. And then move on to the next thing.
I love that. It's one of the reasons why every year we try to get our local rep on the show. So we're based in Richmond, Virginia area, and our local congressperson is Jennifer McClellan. Great lady, nice lady. Probably the first time, some of our Republican listeners that are from Virginia might even have heard her name, and I'm just like you really need to remember that politics are local, but even though she's our congressional rep, like the local, like if you want your kids to be safe, walk into school, like caring about what's happening at the national level isn't going to keep them safe, like getting your superintendents and whatnot activated so they can put street lights, like on the route that they take to walk to school, like that'll keep them safe. And that's something everybody can do. So I'm with you. You're preaching to the choir about, being active in sort of your local community. But
and that's a piece of critical thinking I wish people had, because I think there's a real crisis of critical thinking, a human issue. Yeah. We're getting more susceptible to ChatGPT, getting more susceptible to AI, as well as whatever's on social media is the God's honest gospel truth, right? It's just taking things at face value, and in recognition is to realize how that road got paved, how the school got built, how the school policies change was not because, by and large, an executive order at the presidential level, right? Very, very unlikely. It was much more like a ground up approach from people saying they did not want this or they wanted this done, and it got done. And I think if people recognize that one aspect's just not as important, even though it can be, it's a valid point. But I think it's really, really important to recognize that the little stuff is actually the big stuff.
Yeah. So my last question for you is, like, I guess what's next? I mean, you take on this gargantuan project, you write this book, you talk to all these people. Like, I mean, is there a part two? Given that Trump's going to have another 4 years in office, and are you going to talk to folks about what they think about Barron Trump for 2028 or whatever?
Yeah. Now, so first bit is I get to take a little bit of my public facing scholarship, which I've not done before. And I'm not only a very good capitalist about selling a book, I'm much more doing my research, doing my teaching. I do need to get some of my more academic article stuff out. And I think that comes at the intersection of looking at institutions from a public administration route, as well as I think this religiosity element and like the theories going along with that is something I'm seeing. And some of the questions that were brought up are like clearly connected to what I'm seeing. And I think so there's some of those journal articles that are going out. I do want to do the part two in some ways when we get to that point, maybe with Democratic voters. It's not going to be the same. But I do want to see, I think in the primary as we're getting closer, I would really like to. I'm not saying it'll be a part two of a book, but I do want to do the same, as I think that's fair. And I think that's a valid thing to do, is not just to go, well, I only did these group of people, right? And I think that's going to be a piece of it. But I'm going to go around, keep talking about the issue and try and really put my the flag in, my co-author and I, about critical thinking and just recognizing, being full of empathy for each other is kind of like the conversations we want to really push out there amongst, yes, the facts that we showed, the theories that explain a lot of this. But deep down, those issues are one aspect, but the human element is just the most critical part.
I really love that. Thank you so much, Travis, for being on the show with us today. If people are listening and listen, they will get a lot from this conversation and even more from your book, which we're going to put that link in the show notes for people to get. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your research.
Well, I appreciate it. This was awesome. And I love the questions. It's very fruitful.
Yeah, I felt the same way. That's a good word for it, fruitful. So thank you again. And to our viewers and listeners, thanks so much for joining us again. Hey, if you're joining us on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, share this with someone, share this with your woke friend who hates Trump supporters, and also with your, Trump supporter that can say your dad that only votes Republican and Trump, to say, hey, there are some things that maybe we can all learn about each other. And again, this has been Dr. Travis Ruddle. Make sure you pick up his book, The Totality of Allegiance, Inside the Hearts and Minds of Trump Supporters. And we appreciate you spending some time with us. Until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. God bless, guys. Hey there, Josh Burtram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.